1 second. I have to like allow people to come in, and I want to make sure I don't miss. I don't think I'll miss it. Fingers crossed. Okay, so we'll get started. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll get rolling about fueling for racing and training. So the exciting thing is we actually have some races to fuel for. I mean, that's like pretty darn exciting, because it is like it is so awesome to have people doing fueling plans again. For so long we didn't need them. So this is very exciting for me. I'm a big nutrition nerd, so I like stuff like fueling plans and whatnot. And it's very exciting, like I said, to have races to have fueling plans for. So I'm Beth Peterson. I am a registered dietitian and have been for many, many years now, over 20. That seems like a lot of years. For a long time, I worked clinically at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and I worked with a lot of really sick people. And then I eventually sort of started working my way, probably about 10 or 12 years ago, towards the sport arena. So working with you guys, you healthy people that want to use nutrition to better their performance, but also just to live healthier lives. So that's the whole purpose, with training and racing, I would assume. So I've been a dietitian for a long time. I've been working with athletes for a long time. I myself have been an athlete for a long time. I grew up a runner. So I ran cross country and track in high school, and then for Penn State University. Go Lions, go Nittany Lions. And I ran marathons and did things like that after college. And then I eventually found my way to triathlon. And the first triathlon I ever did, I pretty much panicked very severely in the water, did some sort of combination between backstroke and breaststroke. It was a little sprint near Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And then over the years, I kept at it, and I eventually raced for 6 or 7 years as a professional. I raced long course, so I did 70.3 and Ironman. And then in 2017, I did my last professional Ironman, and I said I would never do Ironman again. Sure enough, I'm training for one right now. So that lasted for about 4 years before I caved. In the meantime, I've done a lot of other things. I've done a significant amount of mountain bike racing. I did Leadville 100. I did the JFK 50, so the run race, so ultra run, a little bit of ultra running. I've done some off-road type racing, trail running, racing, all that types of stuff. So I've done a little bit of everything. And I think that the reason I tell you that is I think it's good to have that perspective, because the fueling, while very, very similar throughout endurance sport, is also a little unique to each sport. So if you have any, we're going to talk in generalizations here, because I know we have some triathletes, we have some runners, we have some cyclists. But if you have any questions specific to your sport or your genre of your sport, because trail running and ultra running is different than running road marathons, and mountain biking is different than road racing and cycling. So if you have any questions, just let me know. So that was a very long introduction. All right, let's move on to race day fueling considerations. First, I'm going to make sure I'm not supposed to be admitting more people. Okay. So I've seen a lot of errors over the years. I've been doing race fueling plans for many, many years now, and I've seen a lot of errors over the years. I personally have made just about all of these, if not more, errors myself. So I can speak from experience, and these are kind of the most common mistakes that I see. The biggest one is definitely not having a plan going into a race. So just kind of thinking, we'll figure it out, as we go, or having a random plan, or, my favorite is, well, I'm borrowing my friend. My friend has a race fueling plan, so I'll just use that. That's one of my favorites. That usually goes horribly wrong. Or, having a plan, but it just not being a good one. So that's a possibility as well. Another big mistake is not practicing the plan. This is probably one of the biggest things I get on people about, is they get this race fueling plan, we do it, and then they tuck it away somewhere. And they bring it out right before the race and they say, oh yeah, I have this plan. This is, I'm going to use this for race day. Well, you should have been using it every day since the day you got the plan until, the race, and practicing it day in and day out, because that's one of the key components of this, of race fueling working properly. Improper pacing, which actually has nothing to do with nutrition, but has everything to do with nutrition. So, probably the biggest example here is if you are doing, let's say, long course triathlon, so you're doing an Ironman, and you're way overriding the bike, you're probably going to have some issues, especially in the heat. It's really hard when it's really hard to do nutrition when all your blood flow is somewhere else, because you're, riding way or running way above where your heart rate should be, et cetera, et cetera. So proper pacing and long racing, whether it be cycling, triathlon, or running, plays a big role in tolerating nutrition. Using a single carbohydrate source, which we'll talk about, that's a big no-no. Drinking water is a big no-no. And that's also something that I see a lot of people do, that we're going to try and avoid as much as possible. Too little or too much fluid, too little or too much sodium. So we're going to kind of talk about how we attack each of these errors or problems. If I can get my slides to advance. So this is one of my favorite studies. This is a study from 2014, I believe. Yes. And this is the citation here. So if you want to look it up, you can read the full study, or I have the full PDF. If you email me, I can send it to you. But basically, this was a study done in, I want to say Denmark or the Netherlands. I don't even know if there's a difference between that. Anyway, I'm a dietitian, don't know my geography, but anyway, basically what they did is they took matched runners, so runners of equal ability, and they randomized them to two different groups. The control group, basically those athletes were just given free rein over their own nutritional strategy. So the control group took nutrition. It was just that their nutrition plan was one that they made up. The runner themselves came up with it. And then the experimental group, the other group, athletes were actually provided a specific race fueling plan. And within that plan, fluid, carbohydrate, and caffeine had recommendations for those three things. So then they all ran a marathon, and they basically compared their times. And what happened is the people that had the specific race fueling plan, so the people in the experimental group that followed this specific plan given to them, that was scientifically backed, on average raced 11 minutes faster than the other group. And that represented about a 5% improvement in, faster time compared to the other group. So that to me is huge. Can you imagine going 11 minutes faster in a marathon just because you followed a race fueling plan? It has nothing to do with, I would kill for 11 minutes. The training that it takes to go 11 minutes faster, that's a lot of hard work, when really, if you just focused a little on the race fueling, or, something like a detail as important as race fueling, it can make that much of a difference. Basically, my conclusion from this study is that race fueling plans equal faster times. And this is obviously in marathon runners, but you could certainly say in an Ironman or a half Ironman, which is a much longer distance time wise, that, it's going to make even more of a difference. Think of, long cycling races or things like that, makes a huge difference. So, this is just my slide to prove my point that this does make a big difference in how fast you go, and also how enjoyable of experience you have. Because, I have spent Ironman marathons, like almost entire Ironman marathons, like throwing up the entire time. And let me tell you, that is not an enjoyable experience. That makes your day go very bad very quickly. And that's nutrition error, that's pacing error, that's nutrition error, and you want to avoid that at all costs. So if I haven't convinced you yet that nutrition and race fueling is important, I don't know what will. Okay, so let's talk about making this plan. How are we going to make this plan? So first, basically determine fluid needs, not just how much, but what you're going to drink. Then we determine sodium needs, not just how much, but also how you're going to get it. And then we basically determine carbohydrate needs, and not just how much, but how you're going to get it. So we're going to talk through all of these things. This will form a very basic plan for you, and then you can get a little bit more specific from there. So determining fluid needs, basically what we have athletes do is do a sweat test. Sweat test can be done as a runner. So you do this in running. As a cyclist, you would ride your bike. As a triathlete, we generally do it riding bike for triathlete. So what you do is you weigh yourself with no clothing on before the test. You ride for 1 hour at roughly the same intensity, and if possible, the same conditions that you're going to race in. You can do a longer ride and or run. So if you're a runner, you would run for an hour. You can do a longer ride or run, but you just have to make sure that for the weigh-in portion, you're weighing yourself right before and right after the hour that we're testing. You don't pee during the ride or before step 4. Do not pee until after step 4. You can drink. We certainly encourage you to drink during an hour worth of, relatively hard riding or running. But if you do, you just have to keep track of how many ounces you've consumed. And then you weigh yourself again with no clothing on after the test. So that's a very basic sweat test. We generally have people do this on a trainer or a treadmill, where you can have control over the conditions. So, it's especially important for like long course triathlon, where you race in pretty hot conditions. You don't want to do this sweat test. You don't want to go ride outside when it's 50 degrees. You're not going to sweat like you are going to on an 80-degree day, when you're doing an Ironman. So again, try and keep everything somewhat race specific when you do the test. And, if you can't, then we have little ways to adjust for different temperatures and things like that. Okay, so to determine fluid needs from that sweat test, basically what we're after is the difference in weight, the first weight and the second weight. That's what we're looking for. So each pound lost is equal to roughly 16 ounces of fluid. That then converts to your fluid needs per hour. So let's just do an example. Let's say the first weight was 146.3 pounds. The second weight was 144.8 pounds. The difference is 1.5 pounds times 16, which is the number of ounces in fluid per pound. So that's 24 ounces per hour. If you consumed fluid during the test, you have to add that to your fluid total. So let's say you lost 1.5 pounds and you drank 20 ounces during, you're going to add 20 ounces to the 24 ounces that we originally found. So that would be 44 ounces per hour. It's important to note that you don't need to replace 100% of your needs. Some level of dehydration is acceptable in training and racing. You can allow up to 2% in your calculation. So that's going to give you a rough idea of how many ounces per hour you need. That number is pretty important. What do the ranges look like? This is, like I said, over the years, I've done a ton of race fueling plans. And I will say that on average, people need somewhere between 24 and 38 or 40 ounces per hour. Have I seen people need less? Yes. We generally try not to go below 24 ounces an hour, but I have seen people that have very low sweat rates that need less. Have we seen people need more? Absolutely. I've seen people need 50, 55, 60 ounces an hour. Their sweat rates are huge. Those are people that generally really struggle in the heat. It's very, very hard for them to keep up. So, and it's not, sometimes people think, oh, well, large men are always going to have really high sweat rates. Small women will have low sweat rates. That is not always the case. I've seen vice versa in many cases. Most people have a relative idea of if they're a heavy sweater or not. When you run on the treadmill, when you ride the trainer, is there a puddle of sweat below you? Those are the heavy sweaters. People that generally don't do well in the heat, that have trouble with cramping, that type of thing. Those are people that generally sweat more and or lose a lot of sodium in their sweat. But doing this sweat test gives you some hard and fast numbers. And feel free to do it a couple times, do it in different conditions, do it, at different times, that type of thing, and see if you can get some good numbers that kind of average out. Okay, so this helps us figure out how much you need. Now you have an idea of, okay, I need 32 ounces an hour. Now we have to determine what to drink. So the answer is not water. Just telling you right now, that is not going to be the answer ever. So what the answer is sports drink. And there's two reasons why sports drink. The first is that we need the electrolyte, so primarily sodium. A sports drink also contains a little bit of potassium, a little magnesium. Small amounts of potassium and magnesium are lost in your sweat, but sodium is the primary electrolyte lost. So people ask me, okay, well then why can't I just use water with electrolyte tabs? So why can't I just use water and then take salt? Well, because the next reason why we need sports drink is because we need the carbohydrate. We need the simple sugar. And those three things, the electrolyte, the carbohydrate, and the fluid, they all work together to maximize absorption of each other. So you need sodium to help with the absorption of fluid. And I think anybody that's drank a ton of water and then all they feel is that water sloshing around in their stomach, that's because you don't have the sodium in your system to help absorb all that fluid. So what it feels like is there's a bunch of fluid just sloshing around in your stomach and it's not going anywhere. It's not being absorbed. If you ever get that sloshy feeling, it usually means you need to take some sodium. So you need the sodium to absorb the fluid. And you need the carbohydrate. Here's the thing. You need the carbohydrate to help with the absorption of the sodium optimally. So the moral of the story is you need all three components to hydrate and fuel. If you have carbohydrate, that helps increase the absorption of sodium. If you have sodium, that helps increase the absorption of fluid. You need the carbohydrate anyways, as we're going to learn later on when you're figuring out your carbohydrate needs. You need the electrolyte anyways, because you're going to lose a lot in your sweat. Water is only fluid. Sports drink has all three of these. So you need all three. And that's why we're going to use sports drink to fill that demand for fluid that you have.
Is that a quick question? I don't know. Am I allowed to ask a question?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering. I'm in a performance nutrition class, and we were talking about diluting sports drinks because like over concentrating the sodium and the carbohydrates and the electrolytes can sometimes be like a negative. So can you can you do a ratio of water and some sort of relative sports drink in your solution to drink, or is it like 100 or none?
Well, we're going to talk about, so basically, you want to use sports drink at full concentration. We're going to talk about what full, quote unquote, full concentration looks like. And there's a ton of research to kind of show what is the ideal composition of sports drink for that maximal absorption that I was just talking about. So you don't want to, and again, I'm talking about specific to our sport. That may be good for some other sport, that may be good, but for endurance, the kind of activity we do and endurance racing, that you don't ever need to dilute sports drink if we're talking about, and now I'm going to talk about the good sports drinks to use because they're designed to be right where you need them to be in terms of carbohydrate and sodium. I don't know if that answers your question, John, but.
No, it does. Thank you. Yeah, I was just comparing what I had in class, and I'm a swimming based college student who's going to track. So I was just curious, but thank you.
Yep. Especially for you, John, you're going to race in very hot conditions. It's different. It's a lot, going from the pool to, racing on land in hot conditions in long course triathlon, you'll definitely need some full strength sports drink. What are the good options? Like, what are these drinks that are optimally, have the optimal carbohydrate and sodium content in them? It's not every sports drink out there, so you kind of have to be careful with what you're using. Gatorade Endurance is a good example. That's not the Gatorade that you buy at the convenience store or the grocery store. Gatorade Endurance has a much higher sodium content in it. Power Bar Isoactive, so it's like Power Bar's version of sports drink. Base Hydro is another one. Scratch is another good one. Tailwind. So those are some good sports drink options. One thing that I will say is that you should consider using what's served on course for longer events. So the primary example here is, for long course triathlon, so for Ironman, you're not going to be able to carry all the fluid, even for a half Ironman, depending on your fluid needs. You're not going to be able to carry all the fluid you need, for your event on your bike initially. For most, for a marathon, you don't want to carry all the fluid that you're going to drink with you. Like, that's just things that you don't want to have to carry when you're racing hard, or for, like a long gravel race or a long mountain bike race. There's just no way to carry everything with you. In Ironman, they have special needs bags, but I'm here to tell you, you should never rely on special needs. Those get messed up more often than anybody would care to know. Somebody takes your bag accidentally, they can't find your bag, so you don't want to rely on that. That forces you to rely on the aid stations, which hopefully there still are aid stations in races. They'll eventually come back if not, but that forces you to rely on aid stations if you're not going to be carrying everything with you. And so if you're going to use what's at the aid station, then you should practice with what's at the aid station. So find out what's on course where you're going to race. Do you have to do that? No, I've definitely seen athletes, carry their own mix and then, you take water from the aid station and mix it. And that makes it way complicated. I've seen athletes concentrate bottles. So they try and get all their drink into one bottle and then they sip a little of that and sip a little water. That is way complicated. And trust me, when you're racing, when you're 100 miles, you're, let's say 8 hours deep into a race, you don't want to have to be thinking like, wait, did I take enough of the concentrate? Did I not? Did I put enough scoops of that? Like that may seem simple in training, but in racing, it is way too complicated. And I've seen it go bad more times than I'd care to see. So the simpler it is, the less likely you will be to make mistakes. For Ironman, or at least the North American Ironman races, that means Gatorade Endurance. That's what's served on course. For the world majors, like Boston, New York City, Chicago, the world major marathons I'm speaking about in the US, that's Gatorade Endurance. For just find out what's served on course at your event. And if it's something that's not good, it's not, we can figure out a way around that. We can take our own mix and stuff like that. But I always suggest that you get used to what's served on course if it is an appropriate drink. Whatever you use, make sure it has a mix of carbohydrate sources. So that could look like on the label, glucose, sucrose, maltodextrin, fructose. Basically, the use of different types of sugars can increase absorption rate. So when you saw that, one of the errors was using a singular carbohydrate source, that's a big no-no because it really lowers the amount that your body can actually absorb. Different sugars have different types of transporters on the intestinal, your guts, basically your guts border. So if you only use a drink that has maltodextrin in it, for example, what happens is you can only use that maltodextrin transporter. And in long racing, that maltodextrin transporter after a while is just totally overloaded. And you're just not gonna be able to absorb the amount that you're taking in and or need. A singular source of sugar, you can absorb maybe 60 grams per hour. If you take in different sugar sources, you can increase that amount up to 90 plus grams per hour. So you want to use products with different types of sugar in them. And everything that I have listed above does. So most commercial sports nutrition products do have different sugar sources. You can always read the label to check, but where people run into trouble is if they are using more natural fuels that, sometimes it will only have one sugar source. So make sure it has different sugars. Make sure that, you check out what's on course and you practice with it. Even if you plan to use your own stuff, you should still practice with what's on course, because what happens when, you hit a bump and all your nutrition goes off your bike or out the back and, you lost everything. And now you really do have to rely what's on course. You will always want to practice with what's on course. Okay. So that was a lot, but we figured out how to determine how much we need. This is figuring out, okay, we know we need this amount per hour in ounces, and this is what we're going to use. And the reason why it's sports drink is because that will help with absorption. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Determining sodium needs. Okay, so how much sodium do you need? Varies widely among individuals, but generally 450 up to 700 milligrams per 16 hours of, 16 ounces, not hours, 16 ounces of sweat. So it's not just a function of, are you a salty sweater or not? It's also a function of, are you a heavy sweater or not? So if you are a heavy sweater, even if your sweat isn't very salty, you're still going to need a lot of sodium replacement. You could be somebody though, and this actually describes me myself. I am not a heavy sweater. I don't need much fluid. Which is good. It helps me in the heat, but my salt is very sweaty. So my sodium needs are actually still pretty high. And these numbers really, I'm saying 450 to 700, but I've definitely seen much higher numbers. So just know this is a general range. Clues as to whether you lose a lot of sodium in your sweat or not. So are you a salty sweater? Is there a ton of salt on your face, your kit, your uniform, your top? When you're done with the workout, are you somebody that cramps often in training and racing? That type of thing. A lot of times people know, does your sweat actually taste really salty? Some people do, some people don't. So those are kind of some clues. There's also these really cool little patches that Gatorade makes now. The true way to figure this out is to go into a lab, and, they have ways of capturing your sweat basically, and testing it for how much sodium is in it. That's not accessible to most people because you need to go into a lab, you have to have a special tool, that type of thing. But Gatorade has started to make these little patches that are designed to determine the amount of sodium in your sweat and your fluid losses as well. They're fun to play around with, but they haven't been validated yet. So don't go, putting all your money on that one little patch, but it could give you an idea. It's another thing to think about, another data point, if you will. Okay, so once you kind of decide on, am I a salty sweater or not? Basically, you multiply your sweat test weight loss. So from our example before, that was 1.5 pounds, by the amount of sodium in your sweat per 16 ounces of sweat. So that will net you a rough estimate of your sodium needs per hour. So in our example before, we had 1.5 pounds lost during the sweat test. Let's just assume an average sodium concentration of 575. That's probably the middle between 450 and 700. That's why I chose it, per 16 ounces of sweat. So basically that comes out to be about 860 milligrams of sodium per hour. That's then you take that number. Okay, well, I'm drinking 32 ounces an hour. I need 860 some milligrams of sodium per hour. Now, how am I going to get that? Okay. Much of your sodium needs can be met with sports drink. So here's where you're going to hear me say again, this is why water is not helpful. Sports drink has a lot of sodium in it for this very reason. The sports drinks that I mentioned, the sports drinks that are appropriate for our type of activity. You can also get sodium through your sport fuels, like the gels that you're going to potentially take, choose, that type of thing. It's important to choose a sports drink that has 500 to 700 milligrams of sodium per bottles, and that's mixed to full strength. That's, when John asked earlier, like, can we dilute it? We don't want to dilute it, because mixed to full strength that's going to give you the sodium that you need. And all those drinks I talked about are in that range. Gatorade Endurance, if you mix 3 scoops of Gatorade Endurance, the powder, with, 20 to 24 ounces of fluid, of water, you're going to get 600 milligrams of sodium. So it's going to be right in the middle. Scratch is on the higher end. Scratch has a higher sodium content. It's closer to 700. Base, I think, is 580, so they're all in that range, and that's why they're the appropriate ones. So you're choosing that kind of sports drink, and then choosing sport fuels that are on the higher side of sodium content if you do have a high sodium need, or especially if you're racing in hot conditions, which explains pretty much every triathlon that there is. So the important thing to know is that not all gels, not all chews, they're not all created equal when it comes to sodium. Perfect example is Ironman has on course this year, they have Martin hydrogels. Martin hydrogels, and I didn't look it up before this, so I'm going to forget, but it's something like 32 milligrams of sodium. Not too helpful. Honey Stinger is another one. Their sodium content in their gels is extremely low. And I'm not picking on these brands in particular. You can get sodium elsewhere, but just know that, like, a Honey Stinger gel is not the same. Power Bar gels, on the other hand, have 200 to 210 milligrams of sodium. So, you can imagine if you're taking an appropriate sports drink and you're drinking 24, 32 ounces an hour, plus you're taking a gel every 40 minutes or so, and it's a Power Bar gel, you're likely not going to have to take extra sodium in the form of base salt or Gatorlights or something like that. You can get it through your gels and your sports drink alone. Huma is one that has some very high electrolyte type gels. It's important to know that even, not all gels within the same brand are the same. So, Goo is a perfect example. Goo has salted flavors like salted watermelon, salted caramel. Those gels have generally 100 milligrams or so of sodium versus their usual, like, let's say a French toast Goo gel, which is delightful, by the way. It really does taste like French toast. They have closer to 40 or 50, 60 milligrams. So look on the back. A lot of people just kind of buy a brand and they buy the flavor they like, and they don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff. So start adding that up in your head when you're determining this stuff. If you're somebody that, needs, you use all the high electrolyte type gels and you're using the right kind of sports drink, but you still need extra sodium per hour, you can use salt supplements. I recommend using free salt. So Base Performance Salt is an example. Gatorlights is the Gatorade Endurance version. And basically it's salt, like it looks like salt coming out of your salt shaker. It's not in a capsule. It's not in a pill. And those salts are absorbed fastest. So just imagine if you take a capsule, and the capsule has to be basically released in your system before that salt can be used. If you just pour the salt right in, it's going to be able to be metabolized and used a lot faster, which is very important if you're in the midst of a cramp. So
if you're using like a powder, because I've never even heard of Gatorade, I've just been using like regular Gatorade powder. That's why I just looked to see how much was actually in it. But if you have a powder, you just have to make sure it's like per 16 ounces, you get 500 to 700, or is it like per 32 ounces? Or does it matter?
You just have to make sure it's based on what brand you're using. You're generally going to use, John, for you, you're going to want to use 24-ounce bottles. So if that's Gatorade Endurance, that's 3 scoops to make it full strength. If that is Tailwind, it's 2 scoops to make it full strength. It just depends on the brand, basically, and how they formulate it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we determined our fluid needs, what we're going to drink. We determined our sodium needs, how we're going to get that sodium. And now we're going to determine, I really wanted to take calorie out of this and just have carbohydrate needs, but of course I forgot. So pretend you don't see calorie and just look at determining carbohydrate needs. They're roughly equivalent, but not equivalent enough. So I want you to just focus on carbohydrate. So how do you determine how much carbohydrate you need? Because that's the last missing piece. To get through a long race, you need fluid, you need electrolyte, and you need carbohydrate, and you need a lot of all 3. So how much carbohydrate do you need? Basically, again, these are very general guidelines because, it depends on your size. It depends on your, not just your weight, but your lean body weight. But generally, most people will need to eat about 25 grams of carbohydrate every 30 to 45 minutes. Average hourly carbohydrate intake of 5/8 times your lean body weight. So not your total body weight, your lean body weight. And that requires you to know roughly what your body composition is. So obviously getting that a value of that tested is ideal, or estimating. So for example, for a 160-pound athlete that has 6% body fat, which again, I wanted to change that too. Who has 6% body fat? That's extremely low. So I don't know why that's the example, but anyways, for a 160-pound male that has 6% body fat, you figure out their lean body mass. So basically 160 times 94%, and multiply that by 5/8, and you get about 90 grams of carbohydrate that you need every hour. That's for cycling in triathlon, and in cycling type races. In cycling only races, you can reduce that by about 10% if you're not running off the bike afterwards. Run carbohydrate intake, both in triathlon, and then also run carbohydrate intake just if you're running a marathon or an ultra or something like that, should be about 2/3 of that average, of the above average per hour. So that's going to give you a rough idea of how many grams of carbohydrate you're looking for per hour. So now we know we need about, let's say we need 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. How are we going to get it? Well, once again, I remind you that sports drink just so happens to have a lot of carbohydrate in it. And that's another good reason why water is out and sports drink is in, because if you just took water and you needed to take 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, for instance, through gels and chews and bars and things like that, you're going to be eating every 10 minutes to get that in. Sports drink helps. You drink the sports drink. I'll use Gatorade Endurance as an example. 1 full bottle of Gatorade Endurance mixed to full strength has 44 grams of carbohydrate in it. So let's say you need 2 bottles an hour. Right there, you're almost up to your 90 and you didn't even have to eat anything yet. Most people need a bottle and a half an hour. That gives you a very good start on your carbohydrate. So again, that's why it's important to choose a sports drink that has 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrate per bottle. That's why we don't dilute sports drink. We want that carbohydrate in that amount. 40 to 50 grams. Again, Tailwind has mixed to full strength, has 50 grams per 24 ounces, 20 to 24 ounces. Gatorade Endurance has 44. So, all those sports drinks I mentioned before are in that range. How do you make up the difference? So let's say you're somebody that needs 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour. You need 1 bottle of sports drink per hour. So there's 44 grams right there. How are you going to make up the difference of that other 36 grams? That's when we add in gels, chews like the Cliff Shot Blocks or Scratch Makes chews. Goo makes chews, all the major brands do, Power Bar does as well. Waffles, so Honey Stinger, the little Honey Stinger waffles, the Goo makes waffles, or bars. That's what makes up the difference. Gels and chews, probably the best option because those are the simplest form of carbohydrate and electrolyte. If you use solids, I wouldn't recommend using solids in run-only races unless if it is a long ultra type, we're talking like 100K and up. So, 100K run race, 100-mile run race, those people are going to take some solids. Everything below that, depending on how long you're out there, you are best done with, simple carbohydrate like gels and things like that. In triathlon, on the bike, you can use solids early on. As you get closer and closer to the run, you want to start moving towards just gels and simpler things so that when you get on the run, you don't have a stomach full of solids. And then if you're doing long, long races in cycling only, you can use some solids. The key is that if you don't have to run, or the farther away you are from the run, the better, the more likely you are to be able to tolerate solids. Again, remember, whatever you use, make sure it has a mix of carbohydrate sources. So all the gels and things like that will, again, where people get in trouble with this is if they say, well, I want to fuel with raisins. Great, raisins have a lot of simple sugar in them, but they only have one singular source of simple sugar. They have fructose. So just remember that type of thing. Okay, I am running low on time because I talk a lot. There's other considerations that I'm quickly going to run through, but I'm quickly running through them, but it doesn't mean they're not important. It just means I talk too much. So I'm running out of time. Okay. Caffeine is a very important consideration. So you want to build throughout the day with caffeine. Amounts. Let's talk amounts. 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so let's say you are, I'm not good at math, so I don't know why I'm trying to do math on the fly. But let's say you are 50 kilograms, then your max throughout the entire day in a race, your max is about 300 milligrams. 50 kilograms is pretty small. So that's a small person. They get 300 milligrams, obviously 100 kilogram large man is going to get 600 milligrams or whatever. That's not a ton in a really long race like Ironman or an ultra marathon. That will go pretty quickly and you want to use it towards the back half of the race. If you're doing something like a half Ironman or you're doing an Olympic, you're doing a marathon, you can probably caffeinate the entire way through because you have the same amount that you can use over a shorter time. How do you get caffeine? Gels, sports drink. Tailwind has a version of their drink that's caffeinated. Gels, not just be careful, not all gels have the same amount of caffeine in them. This is another thing that people are like, oh, I didn't realize I was taking a gel that has, 100 milligrams of caffeine in it. So most gels come in like 2 different versions, 2 different amounts, like a lower amount, which is usually somewhere between 20 and 25 milligrams, and a higher amount, which is generally somewhere between 40 and 50 milligrams. There are some gels that are 100 milligrams. The Martin gels that I spoke of that are on the Ironman course this year, they only have one caffeinated gel and it has 100 milligrams of caffeine in it. So be careful. That is what we call the silver bullet. So, just be wary of that. It also comes in chews like the Cliff Shot blocks, for example. The Scratch has gel chews that have caffeine in them. There's chewing gum. So I think chewing gum is tough in racing, but I know a lot of people that use it in ultras and things like that. And of course, you can get it in pill form too. You can get it in capsule form. So the thing to be careful with caffeine is it can definitely cause GI upset. So too much, you've gone too far, you could be in trouble. So that's why you don't want to go above that, 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. The other important thing about caffeine is that genetic variation really influences how people handle and respond to caffeine ingestion. Also the type of caffeine, also a little bit habitual intake. And by that, I mean, are you somebody that never takes caffeine in daily life? Or are you somebody that, drinks 6 cups of coffee a day and, that type of thing? But probably the biggest thing is genetic variation really influences how people respond. So it's definitely something that you experiment with in training. Don't just on race day decide to start using this. You could need closer to the 3 milligrams, and that might be, that is enough, or it overstimulates you, and that's a problem in a long race. Or you could be somebody that needs on the higher end. So just practice. That's my talk on caffeine. Pre-race breakfast. Let's briefly talk about that. One thing to remember is that if you, on the day of the race, from the time that you get up in the morning until the time that you cross the finish line, your body really needs 3 things. We'll say 3.5 things. And we talked about the 3 big ones, in the previous slides. Fluid, it needs a ton of fluid. It's going to need a ton of sodium, and it's going to need a lot of simple carbohydrate. So those are the 3 things it needs. It needs a little bit of protein as well, especially for the very long days. So from the time you get up in the morning until the time that you cross that finish line, you really want to give it those 3-4 things and not a ton else, because if you give it a lot of fat or a lot of fiber, for instance, or really any fat and fiber, our body doesn't have a use for it on that day. And it's just going to slow down digestion, slow down absorption. It's just going to muck up the works when it's not something that's even going to be used. Fat and fiber and, vitamins and minerals, all those things are extremely beneficial in our everyday lives. We want a lot of all of those things, but on race day, you want to keep it simple. So all that to say that our race breakfast should look very simple. So when I see people that are having oatmeal with nuts in it and a lot of nut butter, that type of thing, that stuff is generally great, but on race morning, you just don't want it. Your body isn't going to use it, and it's going to slow things down. I realize you like nut butter, but on one day, we're not going to have it. So what do we have then? Something low glycemic, just meaning simple sugars, hydrating, sodium rich, low fat, rich in branched chain amino acids, which, that's the protein component. So we use unsweetened applesauce, which has a lot of fluid and a lot of simple carbohydrate in it. A banana, again, same, simple carbohydrate and potassium, 1 scoop of whey protein, that's the branched chain amino acids, and then 1 full bottle of sports drink. And people look at that and they're like, wow, you eat applesauce and a banana before, you know, a 16-hour Ironman race? Like, that doesn't seem like enough. But we have carb loaded leading into this. And so this is just kind of topping you off in the morning. Plus, people, you think you want to eat a lot on race morning, and we all know most people can't tolerate a ton. So that's why our breakfast looks like that. Very quickly, we do the carbohydrate load, like I said, eat as you normally would during race week until the 1 to 2 days before the race. If you're doing a sprint or like a 5K, 10K, that type of thing, no need for a carb load. If you're doing like an hour bike race, no need for a carb load. Olympic distance, which would equate to like a half Ironman, half marathon, that type of thing. What we do is we have a 1-day carb load. Half Ironman, we have the day before carb load plus a big dinner 2 nights out. Full distance Ironman, half Ironman is very similar to a marathon. Full distance Ironman, or any kind of ultra running race, any kind of like long gravel, mountain bike, road race type situation for cycling. We also have a large dinner and a large lunch 2 days out. And then the day before, we have that big carb load day. The big carb load day, the day before, is set up as a very large carbohydrate based breakfast instead of dinner. And you eat carbohydrate throughout the day, and then, but you taper your intake throughout the day such that dinner is the smallest meal of the day. That is an example of what a race fueling plan looks like from us. So it's kind of a lot, but we kind of detail out, what you're eating, when you're eating, how much you're drinking, what breakfast looks like, all that for, various distances. Okay, so one last topic, and then I promise I'm done. What about training fueling? All you did all this whole entire time was talk about racing fueling. Well, this is the easiest piece of the whole thing. It's the same as your race fueling, because remember how I talked about you have to practice your race fueling plan? Where do you practice it? You practice it in training every day, every single day in training. And the reason why is you have to adapt your gut. So like I said, I've seen a lot of people, take their race fueling plan, go use it on race day, and then say, this didn't work. You gave me a bogus plan. I want my money back. This didn't work. But it didn't work because, they had GI distress, or they couldn't get all the fluid down, or they couldn't take all the gels they needed to because they didn't spend all the time prior to adapting their gut and getting their gut ready for what it was going to see on race day. It's not natural to do what we do. It's not natural for your gut to want all that sports drink, all that, gel and simple sugar and sodium and things like that. So you kind of have to train it. In practicing every single day in training, not only do you adapt your gut, but it also ensures that your training is actually well fueled. That's another big mistake I see, not fueling training well, expecting training to go well day in and day out and not fueling it. And then just know that recovery starts with fueling your workouts. So I always use the example, think of it as, digging a big hole for yourself. When you train, you're digging a hole. If you feel some of that hole up with sports drink and gels and things like that, then the amount you need to recover is less. If you keep digging that hole, not putting anything in the tank, digging a bigger hole, it just gets to the point where you can't recover anymore. You just can't keep that up. So that's why it's also important to do your race fueling all the time. You'll make sure that you are well fueled in training, that you're recovering well, and that you're adapting your gut. Same quantities as a fueling plan year round. So, people say like, I want to, I train basically year round, but I don't really want to take, that many gels in a year, which I totally get. So same, but you need the same quantities. You still need the same amount. Like you still sweat the same year round, regardless of whether a race is coming up. So you still need the same amounts. But out of season, so like base training, or let's say you're 30 weeks out from your big A race, you can use different products, and by that I mean you could replace a granola bar with a gel, or a banana or pretzels or something like that. When you get within the last 6 to 8 weeks or so before a race, you're using the same quantities, you're using the same products, you're using even the same flavors that you're going to use in the race. If you're new to fueling, like I start practicing maybe 6 to 8 weeks out with all the same stuff, but I've also been doing this for eons and eons of time. So I could like recite my fueling plan by, heart. And I've practiced it many, many times over the years. But if you're totally new to a fueling plan, that 6 to 8 weeks should be more like 12 to 16 weeks before the race. Okay, so the common errors: not having a plan, a bad plan, your friend's plan. The way to solve that, we're going to make a plan. No practice, minimal practice, practice that plan daily. Improper pacing, you got to make sure you stick with the proper pacing, because that means your gut is going to function well. Single carbohydrate source, choose sports fuels that have multiple types of sugar. Drinking water, just don't even let it be an option. Do sports drink. Too little, too much fluid. Make sure you do that sweat test to figure it out. Too much, too little sodium. Determine your needs and your sources and take supplemental if needed. And that is it. I have finally finished. The core diet is, I didn't even mention this at the beginning. I kind of tend to think most people know what the core diet is, but you may not. The core diet is the nutrition arm of QT2 Systems LLC. And we do other than race fueling plans, we have a cookbook, we do nutrition plans, which is daily eating, meal planning, blood work analysis, one-on-one dietitian support. If you go to this link right here, you'll see all our different services. And then that is me. And that is my email. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And that is the end of my presentation. So I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to look at you guys. Okay, so if you have a question, I am going to look at these questions over here in the chat. You can type it in the chat. You can raise your hand. You can do whatever you like to do. So I'm going to start with the questions that I have over here. On my long ride earlier this week, I started feeling very nauseous towards the end of the ride. Is that likely due to dehydration, insufficient sodium? Assuming that you've been practicing, and it's not necessarily an issue with like it being a foreign thing to your gut and your gut never having seen it, a lot of times nausea is due to dehydration. So not staying on top of fluid, which gets very hard. If you're riding really long, you just get sick of sports drink and you tend to stop drinking, drinking enough. So the nausea can definitely is probably more likely than the insufficient sodium, is the dehydration, if that answers your question, Reem. One thing to consider with fluid consumption, and we didn't really talk about this, these are some of the nuances of a race fueling plan, but in an Ironman, you want to pee twice on the bike. You want to make sure that you pee twice on the bike. In a half Ironman, you want to pee once on the bike. in an ultra race, so like an ultra run race or an ultra, like a long bike race, like let's say the Leadville 100, which took me 10 hours, like that's 10 hours of riding. You want to make sure you pee every 3 hours. JFK 50 miler, it took, I can't even remember how long that took me. It was like a whole day of running basically. But you want to pee, you want to pee every 3 hours in an ultra race. So that's a way to keep track of if you're getting too dehydrated or not. And then the other tip I have is in those long races, front load the day. And this is kind of a good example for you, Reem. Front load that day. Let's say you have to drink a bottle an hour. For the first couple hours, push on that. Drink even more. Drink a bottle and a half, because it will get harder and harder as the race goes on. No matter what the discipline, no matter how long the race is, it gets exponentially harder to take fluid and calories as the day goes on. So front load it. So that might help to not get to that point of dehydration / nausea. Okay, what else? Wait, my chat question. Don't know where my chat went. Hold on, I gotta find my chat again. Close that. Okay. I'm curious what the benefits of caffeine would be for cyclists on race day. Oh, the benefits of caffeine. The benefits of caffeine are many, including, but not limited to. So the main way caffeine works is that it works on our central nervous system, and it reduces the sensation of fatigue. Which is why we drink it, copious amounts of it every morning. I wake up and I'm like, I can't believe I'm up again. Here we are, another day. And I want to reduce this sensation of fatigue. And that is what caffeine does. So in a long race, as you can imagine, and I often tell people in an Ironman or a marathon, or an ultra or whatever, you start to take caffeine in an Ironman when you really start to hit that really low, bad first low on the bike. And for a lot of people, that happens around 80, 90 miles into the bike, where you have this realization of, oh my gosh, I'm 80 or 90 miles into this race. I have a long way to go yet on the bike. And then I have to run a marathon. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Caffeine, that's a good time to start taking caffeine, because it can, it reduces the sensation of fatigue. It kind of gives you wings, like Red Bull says. So it's beneficial. It's one of the few supplements that we know improves performance. So I would use it. You just have to be careful with it. And it can help stimulate it can help you stimulate your heart rate and things like that. So, okay. Next question is, coming off an Ironman swim where you aren't taking any nutrition or hydration, do you have any guidance, like taking in additional nutrition, hydration during the first hour of the bike? So that's a good question. Obviously, you're not taking fluid or calories in the swim of an Ironman or any triathlon for that matter. So I generally tell people in transition of Ironman, they always have, well, I don't know now, I guess things are a little different now, but I'm assuming they'll have some sort of aid. So take sports drink as you're running through transition. When we do our race fueling plans, the nutrition, the fueling starts, basically the timer starts when you get on the bike. So you start taking nutrition right away. And that's, when I say start pushing the hydration, like if you need a bottle an hour, maybe in that first hour, take a bottle and a half. A lot of that has to do with, because it gets harder and harder to take fluid and calories in. But a little of that has to do with, you're making up for a little bit of a deficit. The way we design our plans, the bike really is the time to take it. And I'm speaking to triathlon right now. The bike really is the time to take. That's your opportunity to get the calories and the fluid in, because it's very hard on the run, as we all know. And that's why carbohydrate needs are less on the run. It's just harder to tolerate. It's harder to get fluid in running. And plus you're making up for the swim. So I think that may or may not answer your question. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? All right, guys. Well, let me know if you have anything. You can always email me. I know I've gone way past my time, so I don't want to keep you guys any longer, but definitely email me if you have any questions or thoughts, and happy fueling to you guys. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.